Hi everyone, Effie here. Today I'm making this card for World Card Making Day 2017. I am using our magnificent Magnolias stamp set. I'm using the larger cluster and I'm going to be doing some no-line watercoloring today. I started off by stamping the Magnolia cluster in a light ink onto a watercolor panel. Any light ink that you have should work. If you have dye inks, if you have distress inks, those are all going to work for our no-line watercoloring today. So after I stamped my image, I just wet the entire background surrounding my cluster with clean water because I want to make sure that the background is nice and saturated because I want to drop in bits of color to create a really nice tonal, blurred, or blended background. For my supplies today, I'm using Strathmore watercolor paper, the 300 series. It's the yellow cover pad, and I'm just using a couple of round brushes to do my painting today. This brush, I believe, I'm not sure what number it is, but it's a round brush and it's on the smaller side because I need a thinner brush for all my detailing. And then I have a squirrel brush that I use to create my washes and to do a little bit of blending. And for my paints, I'm using Ken Oliver Colorburst. For that background, I use a combination of, I believe it's a burnt umber, lime green, and Naples yellow. I just created a nice mix. I mixed the colors into that large well that you see in my palette, and then I applied drops of color onto the background, and then I added a little bit of turquoise and I blended it all together. Next, I went to work on adding the first layer of light gray color to my magnolias. I want my magnolias to be white with a little bit of gray shading. So I just used black watercolor powders and I diluted it with water, and then I just added the first layer of shading to my florals. I use my smaller round brush to add the color, and then I use my squirrel brush to blend the color out. When you're doing no-line coloring, a large part of the process is coloring in layers. You put down a first layer of color and then you go in with a second layer of color. Whether you use different colors or different shades of color for the different layers, that's totally up to you, but when you add additional layers of color, it's going to add intensity to your project. You want to take the time to build your layers. You want to put in the effort and you want to build them slowly, go layer by layer, and you're going to find that you get a really rich result at the end. If you want to try out this technique using watercolors, I would suggest going with a larger stamp with bigger images in it first. Maybe something like our rose close-up is really great for practicing. I did practice using that stamp before this, and then I kind of dove in head first with our magnolias. But if you've never done this before and if you're a little intimidated, I would suggest starting with a stamp that has larger images. I'm going to post a video later on of me doing some no-line watercoloring using the rose close-up so you can see that it is a little easier than the magnolias because there isn't as much detail in the rose close-up. Once I finish painting, I set my panel aside to completely dry. You can use a heat tool to speed up the process. Then I'm going to create a mask for my magnolia cluster using the coordinating dies. And I just created the mask out of regular printer paper. After I die cut the paper, I'm going to temporarily adhere it to my watercolor panel. Then I took some white acrylic paint to add splatters to my project. Acrylic paint is a little bit thick, so you may need to dilute it just a tiny bit with water to make it flow a little better so that you can actually create the splatters. After you finish creating your splatters, you want to make sure you clean your work area and your paintbrush because you don't want that acrylic paint to dry because it will become permanent. Next, I carefully peeled off my mask and then I dried the panel using my heat tool, and then I stamped the sentiment from the same Magnificent Magnolia set in our Noir Dye Ink. Then I trimmed my watercolor panel so that it's an A2 size so that it will fit onto my side folding A2 card base. I'm using some strong double-sided adhesive to adhere down my panel onto a side folding A2 card base. I'm using 110-pound cardstock for the base because I need a heavier base for that watercolor paper. Then lastly, to embellish my card, I just used our clear rhinestones in our 3, 4, and 5 millimeter sizes. So I hope you enjoyed today's card and video. It was a little bit of experimenting for me as I haven't really ever made a card like this before with the no line coloring and the dramatic background. So I hope you guys liked today's card. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.